Hey everyone, my name is Abhijit. I'm a certified life coach and a mental fitness enabler. Welcome to my channel. Do take a moment to quickly subscribe to my channel for more updates and videos. And please do share the video with anyone you think will benefit from this. And do like as well, comment, and again, please subscribe. The topic of discussion for this video is along the lines of overcoming social anxiety. So let's first try and establish what social anxiety really is, right? So the definition of it is that it's a fear of judgment and a negative evaluation by others, meaning society, family, etc., leading to an avoidance of social situations. So essentially, it's a buildup of anxiety that comes with interaction itself with people. Now, of course, there are various degrees to it. Some individuals may be a lot more comfortable with family members, but not particularly with, going out to a party, for instance, or where there's networking involved. In some cases, even talking to family itself may seem like a social situation, right? So it's hence very important to understand um, where or what the context is, right? So the root cause behind the this anxiety itself is identities. So let's break down the word social anxiety. Social itself means that it's a conglomeration of identities. That's the way I perceive it. So what I mean by identities here is your occupation, for example, right? Your gender, your value systems, your role as a son, as a daughter, etc. Roles that you have to play, basically, right? Now, the problem with identities itself is that it's something that you're not. And that is where the anxiety comes from. Because you are told, for instance, from the day you are born, that this or that is the ideal qualities, or these are the ideal qualities of a son or a daughter, or this is how that child must behave, you know, always should do their homework, should do this, should do that. It's always a certain conditioning. And it becomes a lot more blown out of proportion when you actually go into society, when you go step out into a networking session or a party or a family gathering, where unfortunately people don't really ask how you are with utmost genuinity. It's always to simply understand what you're doing, right? And a whole lot of the anxiety that's built up in the process is because of you feeling conflicted between these roles. Am I being a good son, but am I also being a good employee? And as an employee, am I being a good colleague to someone of my level, or am I being a good employee under a boss? Am I being a good subordinate here, or am I being a good peer? There's always a certain shift and role play that you have to keep doing. And that social aspect of it is not so much about what you see outside, but as much as what that projection is from the inside. So you have a certain set of values and principles that have been put into you, which are not likely even yours. And you've probably not even been taught to question those values, because if you do, then you're considered a rebel, which is also an identity, right? So from a very young age, there is a conditioning. The key word here is conditioning, that you are expected to do something. You're expected to live up to a certain standard, a certain everything. So essentially, it is always that you can never get the cheese. The cheese is always one level up. The more you try getting it, the more it will go up, which never lets you settle with who you really are. And that identity is not something that you see because you go to a networking session. It's not because of something you see when you go out anywhere. It's something that is happening already in your mind, that is being projected into people, which is where the anxiety comes in. Because many a times There are well-meaning people also, who are not necessarily going to judge you for your weight or for how you look or how you carry yourself, for your diction, for your educational background. And yet a part of you will always feel like you're not enough, will always feel like you're not living up to a certain standard, and hence the anxiety builds up. So the anxiety is not again so much to do with anyone else around you as much as it is to do with the projection. And up until a certain age, you know let's say till you're 13, 14, 15, um, because of that intense conditioning, suddenly when you become an adult and you're 18 years old, and when you hear someone say it's all in your head, of course it's going to put you off, because that's not fair, right? Because you've grown up with a certain set of values and ideals. Now the thing is this, that a lot of people may argue that I have very supportive parents, I only feel this way when I'm outside in social situations. The thing that you've really got to ask yourself here is how much of the society's or your perception of society is because of your parents. How much of exposure or lack of exposure is leading to you to conclude itself that your parents are actually being of support, and the problem is only society. So that itself is something that you have not learned to question, you know and you've assumed already, jumped to a conclusion that your problem is only when you network with people or when you meet people. So it's a lot deeper than you think. Social anxiety is not so much of the social system around you or the actual physical social system around you, but it is the mental connotation of it, the projection of it from the inside that has been built over a period of time, right? So this is the root cause, because you're always seeking for validation, you're always seeking for achieving that something abstract that is never going to come. It's always like a goose chase, it's always like a catch 22 situation. It's always like you're jumping between identities, and that's actually the root cause. You not being able to speak a certain way or not being able to do a certain thing is not the root cause. And the anxiety buildup because of that manifests in many ways. You have a lot of sweating at times, palpitation, there's just a lot of body ache in the process. The mind just won't stop chattering. Lot of voices inside your head basically, and you're always going in a loop, right? And you're never comfortable, so you literally want to just lock yourself in your room and basically zone out in that sense, right? So I think the root cause is first understanding that the identity is the problem. The social aspect is not the actual problem. That is the cause of the problem. The actual problem is that it has cemented a certain identity and multiple identities and roles, rather, for ease of language, roles that you have to play in society. So detaching from those roles and those identities and helping you realize that you're more than just your occupation. And if you're more than just your occupation, what are you? You're not a son then. So this is also something that people make the mistake of. They think that if I'm not my job, then I'm maybe a husband. If I'm not a job, then maybe I'm a son. So you're again jumping between roles, right? So the first step, this entire explanation is for me to talk through the very first step, which is itself breaking the identity. There is something beyond these roles. It's like if you're an actor, you're going to act in a movie, right? You may have acted in 10 movies, for instance. What you're doing now is you're jumping from the role in the first movie to the role in the second movie, but you're not going back to the actual real life person who's playing those roles. So what's happening is you're jumping from one movie to another, and you're taking the role too seriously. And then what happens is you become attached to it, and then you become conflicted, because these roles are not true. These roles are not the real. They're just an accumulation of thoughts and beliefs that and perspectives that people have, and that we have learned to not question and simply accept for what they are. So breaking identities is the first thing. The second thing is practicing non-reactivity. Now, because of this kind of conditioning towards identity, what happens is that there is like an automatic reaction. Assuming that you touch fire, you touch a gas stove, right? Your immediate reaction will be to, so if you touch a hot pan, your arm would immediately pull off, right? So that's a reflex action. That's good as a survival mechanism, because if you're touching something hot, it's very important you pull away, otherwise your hands will get burned. But if that is how you're living your life all the time, that's not good. And many people don't realize that they are doing just that. Practicing non reactivity means that the moment someone says something, it doesn't mean that you are obliged to respond immediately. Take a moment, process what they're saying. It's not the end of the world. The silence is scary because, again, part of this identity creation is that you have to always keep doing something. If you sit in one place and don't do something, it's a problem. You're expected to keep showing productivity, keep showing a chart of what I've done the entire day. If you don't do that, then you won't get to sleep peacefully. And even if you finish a set of tasks that you have for the day, you will still think I didn't do enough. So you're caught between not doing anything at all, not doing enough, and it's just putting you in a big mess. So practicing non-reactivity means that you don't have to come to a conclusion on everything. Not everything has to have meaning. Not everything has to have everything chalked out. When someone says something or does something, take a moment and be mindful of what they're saying. Take a moment, process it, and then come back with a response. So practicing non-reactivity means that you're going from a compulsive state of touch the hot pot, take off your hand, to looking at a hot pot for a second and asking yourself if you should even touch it. That is the difference between reactivity and creating a response. The third thing is setting boundaries. Now, in the course of figuring out, so to speak, or learning, or in the process of learning what these identities are, going deeper and deeper, if you sit to understand where and why you think a certain way, where it is that this feeling comes from or that feeling comes from, you'll come to understand that setting boundaries is hence very important, which is not to say that you should avoid going out, but which is to say that this is my value system, principles that I've been brought up with. This is not okay. This is what I need to change. And then you start working on a certain set of things to improve and further yourself. And setting a boundary is setting a boundary around that. Because believe me, there's a lot of work, personal, internal work. That is where the boundary needs to be set. People don't need to keep knowing what it is that you're doing in your personal space. You are entitled to keep that learning process of the first two things, where you break away from identity and you practice non-reactivity. Set a boundary around that and keep practicing within that space until you slowly start to discover and begin to understand who you really are, right? So setting boundaries is not a way to say this is one of the ways of setting boundaries, of course, is to also say, hey, I'm not comfortable with you telling this to me and not comfortable with you saying that to me. But again, the problem with that is it's feeding into an identity that you have. And if anyone doesn't meet that identity, then you don't want them in your life, which means you are limiting the possibility of your own expansion, which is not good. So setting a boundary again doesn't mean that you set a wall around yourself and only anyone who says or does anything that meets your identities can come in. It means that you protect that space of vulnerability and of learning, because it's a lot of reflection. It's not easy to go in and change years and years of wrong conditioning or of unhealthy conditioning is what I would say. So to do that in a personal space, set boundaries for that, keep that to yourself, and maybe talk about that to a therapist or to someone like me, a life coach, or to a psychiatrist if you're going to one. Keep it to a very, to a professional in that sense, someone who is in a setup of both being objective about things so they can guide you, and also in a space of compassion that is guided It's not to simply just feed your perception or your identity, right? The third thing is communication via body language. Now, understandably, you can't just stop going out. You still have to meet people. You still have to go out, even if it's to go out and buy vegetables somewhere. You still have to interact with people, right? So take a deep breath, because it's not, again, the end of the world. Just remember that any anxiety you feel build up is an accumulation. It's the identity of years and years that's making you feel that way, and that you're already working now to disidentify from it, right? Not disassociate, but disidentify. There's a difference. Disidentify, disidentifying is you saying that you're not that. Dissociating is you just pulling away from reality and going into an abyss, which is where substance behavior, uh, smoking, drugs, etc., come into the picture. You don't want to dissociate, you want to disidentify. There's a difference, right? Communication via body language. So these are some of the tips, right? Irrespective of what culture you are, what you wear, basic respect begins with eye contact. And that is also where people get afraid. Learn to make eye contact, because you are not going to be looking from the lens of the identity of a subordinate or the lens of an identity of a son. You're going to simply look from the lens of no identity. You're just going to go in with openness to what the day has to offer. Breaking away from that chain is not easy, but it will come with practice. If you practice the first three tips, the fourth tip is keeping it simple and just making eye contact. So if someone talks to you, that is the most hardest thing to do, and that is also the one thing that will help you overcome anxiety, is you facing the demon within yourself that says you're not worth it, you don't deserve to look at someone in the eye, you have nothing to offer, you don't have this, you don't have that. None of that matters. Look in the eye, okay? Prove to your projections in the mind that it's not true, that you are capable of looking into someone's eye, right? And talk, and practice non-reactivity while you're talking. If you don't know the answer to something, you can easily say, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure about this, allow me to get back to you. Or, I haven't thought about this before, but I think it's a good idea, right? So these are just some pointers you can use. A little bit of defense also initially, or something along the lines of, I think that's very insightful, thanks for this. So if you have noticed, in all these three lines I've mentioned, I'm praising the other person who I'm talking to, and I'm praising them and I'm validating them, so they can actually, in one sense, stop trying to convince you of something. You can just let them know that you're convinced for the sake of it, and take what they say as it is without having to identify. And the fifth point, which is to reflect, is when you come back, and because you've been doing the first three tips, and now the fourth tip is where you're meeting people. Now that learning is what you're going to use to reflect and compare with what you've been doing in your personal space, to actually understand how much of this is who you are, which identity it falls under, and what you need to distance from, and what you need to disidentify from, right? So the reflection can be done in many ways. You can talk to a therapist or a life coach or a psychiatrist, or you can self journal. You become a student of yourself, basically, right? And it's a continuous process. You keep doing tip 1 2 3 4 5 in a cyclical fashion. You will slowly get to a point where you're a lot more confident in carrying yourself. Okay, so just to quickly summarize, social anxiety is a fear of judgment and negative evaluation. We have also dived into in social situations, sorry, and it also comes with having to understand that it's about breaking identities. We've also we also ended up diving deeply into the word social and anxiety, and how that is actually coming from the projections in the mind after a certain age. And it's important to go through the 5 tips in a cyclical fashion, one after the other, and keep doing this until it becomes a process. Those 5 tips are to break identities, to practice non reactivity, to set boundaries, communication using body language, and reflection. Where I come in as a life coach is that I know that following these 5 tips is not going to be easy, right? And as an accountability coach, I understand that each person has a very individual trajectory because each person has a different definition of success, definition of the same role. So if there are 5 mechanical engineers, not all 5 of them are the same. Each of them have been brought up in different families, different value systems, cultural significance, etc. So for me to work with each of them, albeit the same occupation, is me disidentifying them from helping them disidentify from their definition of mechanical engineering itself, right? And what that role means to them, so that they can become a lot more holistic in their approach. And in the process, what happens is you become comfortable in your skin. And as a life coach, that's my goal, to help you get there. And I'll keep working on with you session after session to get you to that point where we can do a lot of the reflection. We can go through each of these 5 tips one after the other. And there'll be a lot of compassion, of course, to help you get to a point where you're able to then practice this for yourself, even without me, and you will start seeing results. You focus on the problem, which is the identity creation, instead of the symptoms, which is I need to learn English or I need to dress better, etc. Those are just the symptoms. Those are just it's not really the problem. The problem is the identification that you need to break from, right? So I hope this helps. Please do subscribe to the channel again, share this video, leave a comment, do like the video as well. Take care of yourself. For personalized life coaching plans, I've put my details in the description below. Please do reach out. Take care of yourself again. Have a great day, week, year, and eternity of happiness. Speak soon. I'm here. I care. And you matter.